Ellenville, New York, at a reunion for people who, as young children, were sent by their parents on a train to England to escape the Holocaust. My guest is Herbert Aronson, and this is his story. Mr. Aronson, can you tell me where and when you were born?
Yes, I was born February 23rd, 1923, in a town called Braunschweig, which is the next bigger town is Hanover.
And what were your parents' names?
My father's name was Carl Aronson, and my mother's name was Emma, but her maiden name was Emma Goldschmidt.
And where were they born?
My father was born in Graz, and my mother was born in a town called Eschwege.
In Eschwege.
Mm.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My father had an engineering bureau.
Mm-hmm. Are they still living today?
No.
No? How many siblings did you have?
I'm the only child.
Did you have a close family?
Yes, very close family.
Aunts and uncles?
Yes, had some aunts and uncles.
And what was the religious situation with your family?
We were conservative.
Conservative, observant conservative?
Well, more or less, not totally observant, but we held to certain, we went to temple or to synagogue, and when, on the holidays, not every Saturday, but so semi-observant, I would say.
Mm-hmm. What was the town like where you grew up?
Small town, about, at that time, around 150,000 inhabitants, maybe 300 Jewish families, if that many, I don't remember.
Oh, and so your parents' friends, were they Jewish or they mixed?
This I really don't know, because I don't know what my parents' friends were. I only know that my father's sister lived in the same town, and we had a very close relationship with my aunt and uncle.
Mm-hmm. And what about your own friends? Were most of them Jewish or not?
No, in fact, I had no Jewish friends. They were all Christians.
They're all Christian?
Yeah.
Were you aware of the rise of Nazism?
Oh, yes.
How so? What did
problems were created in the school. I went to what is known as the Oberrealschule, which is beginning of college, and I was the only Jewish child in the school, and I had a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of problems as a result in school.
What kind of problems?
Well, they would kick me and throw rocks at me, and that kind of problem. Physical, they would try to beat me up and things like that.
How old were you at the time?
Well, I started at 14. I started at 12, sorry, I started at 12. And at about 14, I was no longer able to go. The director had asked my parents to withdraw me.
And what was the administration of the school like when you were picked on for being Jewish? What was their response?
They wouldn't respond at all. There were some colleagues that my father had with whom he served during World War I, and they just so shrugged their shoulder because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. Were you afraid when you were a student, when you were a child?
Not really afraid, no.
Did you have a feeling of danger?
Well, it was an uncomfortable feeling, I would say.
And then did you say you were removed from school?
Yeah, the director asked my parents to remove me because it was no longer safe to be in that school.
Do you remember Kristallnacht?
Yeah.
What do you remember about it?
Well, Kristallnacht, my parents in the interim had sent me to Berlin. That was a school called Umschichtungsstelle, which meant that they would retrain people into other kinds of professions. Mostly businessmen would become machinists or carpenters, trades that were saleable in the immigration. Of course, I was sent there, and I had no trade to be retrained into, but I was then trained, to become a machinist. And during Kristallnacht, I was at that school. And my parents or my mother called me, and I went back to Braunschweig, my hometown. Meanwhile, they were looking for my father. My father had escaped, but eventually came back home And
Why did he escape?
well, he went. He tried to escape because they were looking for all the Jewish men after Kristallnacht. And he had escaped and traveled around the country a little while, but that was no longer possible, so he came back home. And then my mother sent me back to Berlin because the school itself had been destroyed, but where I was training, but the younger people like myself were sent into the various committees to do some work for the committees in the immigration. And I personally was assigned to the person that set up the Kindertransports in Berlin.
You were assigned to the person?
Yeah, well, I was doing delivery and opening doors for people and things like that. I was a young kid.
Now, was your father or your mother ever arrested?
My father then eventually turned himself in, and he was sent to prison and waiting for the next transport to a concentration camp, but that never occurred.
Mm-hmm. So what did you know about the Kindertransport? How did you hear of it?
Well, I knew about it, and because I was, as I said, I was assigned to this woman that assembled the Kindertransports in Germany.
Now, you were telling me before you had arranged your own...
Well, that's with my mother's prompting. I then eventually asked that woman whether I couldn't be on one of those. Mm-hmm. And she said yes. And that's how I got onto the Kindertransport.
And you knew you were leaving your parents?
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, my mother was aware of it. In fact, my mother prompted me to, kept on prompting me to arrange it that way.
And was there any possibility that your parents could have gotten out at that time with you?
Well, we all had we all had American quotas, but my father was on the Polish quota because the country of his birth at that point was Poland. So that was a very, very long quota and a long waiting quota, so that went, 3 or 4 years.
Now, when you were booking your transportation, did you think at that time that there was a chance you wouldn't see your parents again?
Well, actually, it didn't really occur to me in that way.
It didn't? What
No.
occurred to you?
No,
What kind of thoughts
that
did you
at
have?
some point we would be able to get back together,
Mm-hmm.
my parents and I.
Can you tell me about your farewell, your goodbyes?
Well, I left from Berlin, and without my knowing it, the train itself had stopped in Hanover, and my parents were at the station in Hanover, because that was one of the stops.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we said goodbye.
And what were your parents' feelings at that time?
I think, I don't know, they were interested in having at least me get out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's what their feelings were.
Was it
I don't know what their
emotional?
inner feelings were, but that's the way I saw their feelings.
Now, was it an emotional farewell at all?
Well, not really. I don't think it was that much of an emotional farewell.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not from my point, because to me, it was just like going onto an adventure.
How long were you separated?
I beg your pardon? I'm sorry.
So you go ahead.
Yeah, in fact, all in my entire youth, I wanted to get to America. I mean, even before the Hitler period. Mm-hmm. And I thought that this was one of the stepping stones to get to America.
And so you had a sponsor in England, or did you?
No, it was just, I was sent to a camp.
And how long were you to be separated from your parents before you found them again?
I was in England for about a year and a half, and then I received my permit to come to the United States, and I spent another 2 years or so in the United States till they came, or a year and a
Now,
half.
did you have contact with them that whole period?
Yeah. We wrote while it was still possible until England went to war, and then it was no longer possible. Of course, when I came to the United States, we were still able to correspond until the United States went to the war, but we were able to correspond over Switzerland.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit more about this situation at the train? Were there Nazis there? Was there anything that concerned you for your own well-being?
Oh yes, they were. Well, we had some counselors with us from the so-called committee, and Jewish counselors, and because we were all pretty young, and we had the trained personnel would come through, and the Nazis, I think it was SS, would come through the train periodically. Yes.
And what was their demeanor when they came through, and how were you?
Well, the way they normally behaved, is sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but as though you were sort of second-class citizens,
How is that?
Well,
how was that communicated? Were they?
Well, they were obviously not very pleasant to us, they would bark at us and things like that, basically.
And were you alone on the train? Were you
No,
with someone?
I was with, the train, there were about at least 30 or 40 children on the train.
But someone that you knew?
Yes, I had some friends that I had formed in Berlin, and there were 6 of us that were from that same school. And we were all on that same train to go to England.
Okay, and what happened when you arrived in England? Can you tell me a bit about?
Well, first, as we arrived in Holland, we were all very well received by the Dutch because they started to pass food into the windows of the train and drinks, and then eventually we arrived at Hook from Holland, and there we boarded a ship called the Vienna, which was a ferry that went from Hook from Holland to Harwich, and that was an overnight trip. And then we arrived in Harwich the next morning.
In Harwich, England?
Harwich, England, right.
Did you speak any English at that time?
Well, I had 1 year of English in high school. I mean, their high school, Oberrealschule.
And so when you got to Harwich, who was there for you?
Well, this I'm not quite sure. I don't know what really happened. It turned out that we were sent to a place called Dovercourt, and up to the time I went back to the reunion about 5 years ago in Harrow, where we took a trip back to Dovercourt, I found out that what I thought at that point, or up to now, was the name of the camp, was really the name of the town. There was a camp, a summer resort that the Brits used as a summer resort hotel that was used for the refugee children. And we all called it Dovercourt, but it had a name, an individual name.
Were there lots of people there?
Yeah, there were quite a number of people. Yeah, there were quite a number of people there already, because many of the transport children were staying there until they could be reassigned.
And what were your first impressions and your first feelings? Do you recall any of those?
Well, the only thing I remember I liked was the bread, because I never had that kind of bread before.
What were your expectations in England? What were you hoping to
I really had no expectations. Certainly no formal ones. I thought that at some point I would be able to come to the United States.
And that was your goal?
That was my goal, yeah.
And when you got up there, what happened after that?
Well, I stayed about, I would say about 2 months or so at this Dovercourt camp, with my friends, with my buddies. I had the 6 buddies, and of course made other friends as well, but we were sort of together. And then we heard that the director of the school in Berlin was at Kitchener Camp. And that was a World War I prisoner of war camp that the British used, and had been, neglected quite a bit. It was a bunch of barracks, and they had been, they had been neglected tremendously, and we rebuilt that. The 6 of us volunteered to go to Kitchener Camp to rebuild Kitchener Camp, or to help rebuild Kitchener Camp, and put new roofs on the barracks, and put new walls in the barracks, and put stoves into the barracks and things like that, because that camp was going to be prepared for refugees that were at an older age, that started at 18, I think 18 to 45 or 18 to 35, I don't remember the exact age. And so we were involved in rebuilding this camp. And after about 2 months or so of our stay there, the administration decided that we were not of the age of the people that were supposed to be in that camp, because we were younger. And we had a lot of meetings with the various administrative types, and it turned out that they would, we wanted to stay because we had felt that we had built up this camp, but they wouldn't allow us to stay because it was only for people 18 and over. So they sent us, the 6 of us, had to went to a place called Children's Emigrant Farm, which was a Borstal type place.
Borstal?
Borstal, yeah. That was for delinquent children. And they would train them how to farm. But of course we were separate from that group, but we were at this particular Children's Emigrant Farm. And eventually my visa came through to come to the United States, and then I was able to get to the United States that way.
Now, did you get any sort of feeling of an undercurrent of anti-Semitism in England?
No, I had none at all, no.
And did you find that was a bit of a shock to you? Were you surprised by that?
No, I wasn't surprised. No, but I didn't find any of that.
You didn't find any of that?
No,
You didn't
no.
find it to be a lot different from where you were?
Well, yes, I mean, we weren't in this constant state of anxiety, that something may happen the next day, as was true in Germany.
How soon after your arrival in England did you make contact with your family?
Oh, I think that went on continuously. I don't remember exactly how soon afterwards, but I wrote to my parents because the committee furnished, I think, 1 postage stamp a week for all the children. And that's how I wrote to my parents. And my parents then were able to send me, there was a way of getting international postage that you could purchase in whatever country, in this case Germany, and they would send me one of those coupons to purchase a stamp.
Now, were you or were your parents restricted in what they could write to you or what you could write to them? Or did you feel that it was being...
But censorship, I don't really recall whether there was any censorship. I don't recall.
So
I don't know. There were no holes cut in the letters, no.
And you didn't have any code words or any...
No, nothing at all, no. Well, basically, it was to inform, either my parents or have my parents, hear from me or hear from my parents that they were alive, they were all right.
And what kind of information were you getting from them? How were they...
Well, mostly just, I'm okay, I'm alive.
Do you remember having any dreams or nightmares or anything of particular?
No, not really.
Noteworthy?
Yeah.
What was going on in your imagination at the time? Did you think your parents were leveling with you, or did you think that there was more to the story than what they were writing in their letters?
No, I don't really remember. I mean, I had certain anxieties about them, about their safety, because, it was known that things were getting worse in Germany. But I don't know whether there were any deep fears or anything, there were nightmarish type things, no.
Were you trying in any way to bring your parents over? Was there anything you could do or you didn't?
There was something in England, but I was not too successful because I think they did write to me to make contact with somebody, and I don't think, as I recall now, I don't think it was very successful.
What was life like for you in England?
Well, in England, I was in camp. I was in camps all the time, my entire period, and I had various disappointments. During one of which I told you about, that way to leave Kitchener Camp, where we really put our heart into building it up, and then we had to leave it. But outside of that, I felt that my experience, as I look back at it, a very, very positive one. I felt that, at least the way I look at it now, even then, was that the alternative, was just unthinkable. if I hadn't been able to go to England. So I found it very positive. I thought that the English tried to do many things for us. They weren't always too successful, but I think they tried to at least help us survive, or at least not get killed in Germany. And that was one of our main things. In fact, I went back to Harrow at the first reunion, the ROK reunion, and my main purpose, not my main purpose, I wanted to see, I wanted to see whether I couldn't find some of my buddies that I knew earlier. But one of the purposes of going back to England was to say thank you, England. I felt that was very important to me to say that publicly, which I did.
Who did you say that to?
Well, we addressed, people were able to address the reunion, the people that were there at the reunion, and I made a short address to, to say thank you, England. In fact, there were some other circumstances. I was able to identify a person that nobody was able to identify, a person that happened to have been my best friend, and all they had was a picture of this fellow. And he had been killed during a drop over France. And I was able to identify it. So together with making this little announcement of the identification, I also felt I'd bring in my little thing about thank you, England, and I did. And I said it, in addition to that, I said to other people that I met.
So you see it as a positive experience?
Very, very positive. I was really surprised to learn how many people did not have these positive experiences.
Did all of your family make it out?
Yes, they eventually came to the United States, or at least my immediate family, my parents.
And what about your extended
Well, the extended families, I had some cousins that died in concentration camp, and some
What
of
were
the...
their names?
I don't even remember what their names were, but they... I can't think of their names right now. I mean, their last names, and I didn't have that much contact with them. But there was one of my mother's sister who had a fairly large family, and the boys, the fellows who were my cousins, I don't remember them hardly. I don't think I had very little contact with them. But they died in concentration camp. But all the sisters, there were about 4 or 5 sisters that got out to Palestine. Then Palestine, now Israel.
How did you learn that your cousins had passed away, and where were they?
Well, eventually I found that out, and I found that out through my other cousins, that went to England. After all, it was my mother's sister's children, and she knew about it.
Now, up until the reunion in England, did you always feel you were fortunate, or did the other stories make you feel
Very much so, and as I said, I was very much surprised, and I was actually amazed that many of the people that came to the Harrow reunion had these negative experiences, and when, as far as my own children are concerned, I felt that the children that my children have contact with, second generation children, my children feel entirely different about this whole thing. All the other children think that their parents or their parents' experiences had this great negative effect on them, which my children don't.
How old are your children?
My son is 35, my daughter is 30.
And you talk it over with them?
Yeah. In fact, I took them back to England to trace my steps in England. They knew all about everything of my experiences in England. They all knew about all my war experiences too. And as my daughter always said, my father thinks this was all a great adventure. And that's the way I feel about it, actually.
When you say your war experiences, what war experiences?
Well, I served in the American Army. I was in the Pacific. I said to myself at that point that that I probably, as a civilian, would never go to New Guinea. So I took advantage of all the possible things that you could see in New Guinea. I saw the natives in their native dress, and they put on not performances for the soldiers, but their own ritual performances on those very small islands. I went to that. I took advantage of all the possible things that I could while I was there.
When did you enlist in the Army?
I didn't enlist. I was drafted.
When was that?
When I turned 20 in 1943.
Could you tell me about making your way from England to America?
Yeah, I eventually was able to get my permit to come to America, visa to come to America. Actually, what happened was that I was at that point in Oxford, in a place called Wallingford, which was in Oxfordshire, and I needed to see the consul to get the visa, and I was sent to London on a bus by myself, and I arrived in England in the evening, and at that time there was blackout already, a blackout period, and I had to make my way to Bloomsbury House in order to stay overnight there, and then one of the committee persons would take me to see the consul the next morning. Of course, it was dark, and I had not been to London before, so I had a little difficulty getting there, but eventually got to Bloomsbury House. Unfortunately, the visa was denied the first time around because the consul wanted to know who's paying for the trip to come to America, my trip. And the committee person waffled a little bit, and then the consul felt that it was the committee who was paying for it, and they wouldn't allow anybody to enter. They wanted the people that sponsored you, that gave you the affidavit, to also pay for your trip, because they wanted you to become a liability in America. So then my various uncles and aunts in America and in England got together and paid for my trip, and then eventually I took off from Liverpool.
Why was it so important for you to get to America?
Because first of all, I wanted to get to America. My family was, that was my wish as a young kid. I always wanted, that was my great wish, to come to America. And my mother wanted to come to America because when she saw that things were not, we couldn't stay in Germany, that was her wish, and my father wanted to come to America too. So we all felt that we wanted to come to America. And we had some family here already that, that had emigrated before.
And where in the States were they?
They were in New York.
In New York.
Yeah. Well, Brooklyn, one family, one of my aunts and uncles were in Brooklyn, the other ones lived in Washington Heights. And then I had another uncle and aunt that lived in Glasgow.
So you went from England to New York?
Yeah.
What date?
I think I left on early part of May of 1940.
And at that time your parents were still?
Still in Germany, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you made your way to New York?
Yeah, to New York. Well, on the ship.
Mm-hmm. And what happened when you arrived here?
My uncle met me, and my aunt and uncle took me into their house. I lived with my aunt and uncle till my parents came. My parents came,
And what year did your parents arrive?
In 1941.
Mm-hmm. And what were your impressions of America?
Oh, I was very enthusiastic. I liked America. I was very
Lived
happy
up
here. I went to school here. And after the war, I went to college, finished my high school here, went to college, went to graduate school.
So it met your expectations?
Oh yeah, by all means. I'm very happy here. I like it very much.
Do your children live here?
Yeah, live with me. Our daughter lives with me, and our son lives in Washington right now.
And where are you living right now?
In Queens, Forest Hills.
Mm-hmm. And how did you adjust to your new life? What did you do when you?
Well, the first thing after becoming a little bit adjusted, my aunt said then I should go to what high school here, and I finished high school. I was drafted into the Army, spent 2.5 years in the Army, and then I went back to school and studied engineering and had a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. And then I worked as an engineer for a number of years, and then I became a college professor.
And you're a college professor now?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the reunion with your parents?
Yes, we arranged for. I paid for the. Saved enough money to pay for the passage, together with my aunt and uncle, and we had a reunion. We were very happy to be together again. We established a new life here. We took an apartment near my aunt and uncle in Brooklyn.
Were your parents ever forced into hiding in Germany?
Yes, in fact, my father, as I told you before, my father had, during the Kristallnacht, had sort of hidden in various parts, traveling around in Germany to escape being sent to concentration camp. And when that was no longer possible, no longer feasible, he came back home and he reported to the police station rather than to the Gestapo, and they put him into prison for a while.
How long is a while?
Oh, about I think 3 or 4 weeks, and apparently waiting to gather more people to send to concentration to, I don't know which concentration camp was near us, but to a concentration camp, but that never occurred, and then he was released from prison. My mother, meanwhile, was very ingenious, wanted to make sure that he hadn't been sent away, so there were various business papers that needed to be signed, so she went to the prison administration to make sure that he would, because he needed to sign these papers, and of course the signatures came back and she knew his signature, so.
Oh, so this was
So
her way
they
of checking
confirmed
up
that
on-
he was still at that prison. Yeah.
And when you say they were in hiding, he was in hiding, or when?
Well, he was in
after-
hiding for that time. They had to move. I don't know, they weren't in hiding in that sense, but that part was hiding. He was hiding. He was hiding from the Nazis. But they lived, I guess, not a normal life, but a very restricted life in Braunschweig. They had to move from their residence that we were in to some other residence. Of course, I don't know what residence they were in, to a one-room residence somewhere, and it was very restricted.
Was there at any point they had to hide their Jewish identity?
No, not that. In fact, they had there was a traveling rabbi, female rabbi, which was very unusual for those times, who came around, to do the pastoral duties.
Mm-hmm. Do you know her name?
No. But that's not usual. We have a female rabbi in our congregation too. We had a female, Stephen Wise. Yeah.
And what congregation do you belong to?
Stephen Wise, in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When did you marry?
In 1954.
And what's your wife's name?
Eva Bear, and her maiden name is Bear.
And you're still married to her today?
Yes.
And what was her background?
She's from Vienna.
And where was she during the war?
She came to the United States with her family, I believe, before the Kristallnacht. But I'm not too sure. I think she came before the Kristallnacht, yeah. But around that period, I think in 1938.
Mm-hmm. Well, your experience sounds really positive. Did it change your life at all, that period?
You mean the British experience?
The German experience.
Well, I can't tell because I can't tease it apart whether it changed my life, but I certainly don't try to bemoan my fate. I feel that I was, that's life just keeps on going on. And,
what kind of information would you like to tell future generations?
about what?
About your past, our past?
Well, I would like them to know that there was not only a negative side to everything, but there were positive sides too. And I don't think that that children should feel that they suffered because of their parents' experiences, that they're suffering now. because of their parents' experiences. I think that I'm very much in favor of, my philosophy is that I think everybody can make his or her own life, and there are really no restrictions. You don't have any baggage that you carry around with you. I think you need to be able to just find your own way to do it, but it can be done. I feel that I made my life, and I think anybody else that wants to, really has the motivation to do so, can do so.
Have you been back to Germany?
Yeah, but only very, very briefly, because we took a trip my wife and I took a trip in 1957, and part of that trip was to go to Austria, to Vienna, and to Braunschweig. So I went back to Braunschweig. In fact, I looked up my old buddies there.
And what were they? How were they?
Well, I can't say that. I don't know. I assume they were not Nazis, but I don't know, of course. But they didn't appear to have been Nazis. I found them. There was a little difficulty to find them because Braunschweig had a number of 1,000 plane raids during the war and was almost completely destroyed. In fact, during my army career, we had this newspaper called Stars and Stripes, and they would every once in a while print what kind of raids were made on Germany. And since my army buddies knew that I was from Braunschweig, they would always show me a 1,000 plane raid over Braunschweig. Mm-hmm. And so much of it had been destroyed at that point, and I didn't really remember because my first impulse was to look them up in the telephone book. But then it turned out that telephones were not that widespread yet. Mm-hmm. And then I remembered that somebody pointed out that the Germans, record keepers, also kept kept records of everybody who lives in the town. There were other records. So I found them, and I met them, just very briefly since I only stayed for one day. And actually, this was about 20 years after I'd left Braunschweig. We found that we had difficulty communicating. Not because I still spoke German, still speak German, but it occurred to us then later on, that the language really progresses and lives, and when you leave a country, don't speak it anymore, then that is the end of that's where your language stops. So there are many, many words, many technical terms that went into the language which I didn't know. One example was that, what does one talk about, in the beginning? How did you come here? How did you get here? So we tried to explain that we came by jet, and then didn't know the word for jet. So we had a lot of problems communicating. There were many other areas that, and I couldn't make them understand what it meant until later on I talked to somebody else, who knew the word for jet. But at that point I didn't, and I could not make them understand what it was.
How do you feel about Germany today?
Well, I certainly would not want to live there. I don't. I do buy German products, but in a very limited way.
Why is that?
Well, because I don't feel that I want to spend my money on countries that have expelled me, so to speak. So it's not that rigorous. I mean, I do buy German products, but as much as I can avoid, I will.
Out of your whole experience during the war and after, was there any particular obstacle that you felt you had to overcome? Is there anything that you feel you see yourself as having fought against or achieved in spite of?
You mean in terms of personality? Or?
In terms of personality or in terms of situation?
No, I feel that whatever I achieved, I felt that much of it was my own doing, my own motivation, my own effort, and I never felt, when I wanted to do something or get somewhere, let's say, not necessarily, a physical place, but get to some new station in life, I was able to do it, and I did it. I became I used to work as an engineer for many years, and then the opportunity arose for me to go into academia, so I became a college professor, and I do a lot of consulting, so I feel I eked out my little niche in my life, which I enjoy.
Are your
Very
children
much.
as independent as you are?
Hmm?
Are your children as independent as
Pretty
you are?
much so, yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to say?
I don't know, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, I think that about wraps it up then.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you. I certainly think that my wife deserves a lot of credit for supporting me, in my efforts and my, what I do. And my children are very supportive. So I think they deserve a bit of that credit as well.
What is your biggest accomplishment in your life?
Well, the things that I do. That I'm able to teach students to become engineers, and able to consult in litigation matters. I feel that that's an achievement. My educational background, that I was able to achieve my education the way I did. And, I don't know, I haven't really thought about ordering these things.
What do you hope to get out of the Kindertransport Association?
Well, basically, one of the things that I was interested in my early early contact with it, was to see whether I couldn't find my buddies, my friends that I came with originally from Berlin, the 5 other boys. One of them has been accounted for, unfortunately, he was killed. But I have not yet found the other 4. And it's true that I have not made any effort like putting an ad into the paper, but I've been, trying to talk to people, and every once in a while when I mention things like Kitchener Camp, somebody comes up to me and says, well, I was in Kitchener Camp, but nobody really remembers the other 4 fellows in that.
What were their names?
One name was, as best I remember, was Horst Spies. Spies, S-P, as best I remember, S-P-I-E-S-S. Another one was Hans Löwenstein, and I don't remember the other 2.
And you know where they were from, their towns that they came from?
Not really, no, I don't. I don't recall, I probably knew at that time.
And
But outside of that, when I found out that most of them felt to have this negative experience, I sort of made it a mission to talk about the positive experiences in England. Of course, it's true that I do see where some people, some of the children were abused, and not treated well. That went to individual homes, and perhaps my experience to be in camps, was a little more sheltered because larger groups. But nevertheless, I always, as I said before, I shudder to think what the alternative would have been, not to go to England.
how do you feel about neo-Nazism and whether or not you...
No, I think it should be banned. They should,
If your children wanted to go there to Germany, how would it affect you today?
wanted to. What do you mean?
If they wanted to visit, or if they wanted to live
Well,
there?
they certainly wouldn't want to live there. That I do know. I don't want to live there, but possibly visit. Yeah. In fact, I haven't acted on it yet, but I have an invitation to come back to Braunschweig in 1994. Unfortunately, it sort of fell between the cracks, and I haven't done anything about it yet. But I expect to revive it and perhaps act on it. Because many of the towns in Germany have asked the former residents, or at least their children, to come back for a visit. And I have it's not a firm invitation, but a proposal for an invitation.
And when people say to you, where is your home?
My home is New York, or my home is in America. Oh, I feel completely American.
Well, thank you very much for talking with me today.
Sure, my pleasure.
And that's the end.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was really a pleasure
Nice.
talking to you.
Thank you.
So you know you can order those tapes downstairs
Uh-huh.
tomorrow, isn't that right?
Yeah, and there also they go to archives. Yeah.
I see.
So
Okay.
it's gonna, so possibly you'll find your friends from.
Hopefully.
Right.
Yeah. I've tried in many different ways, but so far I've been unsuccessful.
Or maybe this will
Yeah, maybe.
pass on.
Okay.
We had a really different spin on things.
Okay, yeah, well,
Sorry about it.
that's actually why I signed up.
It's a
Actually, I've
really
noticed the adventure. A lot of people.
Yeah, well, they started, you know, I was going to talk to Melissa as well, because you know, a little bit of her movie, you know, was where this one woman talked about the adventure aspect, but that sort of got then swept under the rug, like, because then everything else became negative again. So I was going to talk to Melissa about that, and I felt that there is really another side.
Well, it's a sign that they want to hear. Do you?
No,
do you-
it's okay.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.